Okay, here's the thing. Today is the 30th of March and Wednesday, the 30th of March, and I had my bone marrow biopsy done yesterday. Now, the interesting thing about it is that it was a interesting procedure. It wasn't way too painful, but it was really weird. But that's not necessarily something you can talk to people about. You don't want to tell people, you don't want to freak them out. You don't want to, make them feel bad in general. So I don't have anybody I can talk to about that. I can't tell my parents because they're miles and thousands of miles away. My mom's already freaking out, and my dad's not doing much better, to be honest. I mean, he's hanging in there, but I know that it's weighing on him that they're so far away, and I'm here going through a diagnosis and all of the things that would have to go through. So I don't necessarily want to tell them all of the gory details. I can't tell my wife the gory details because she would just freak. I haven't talked to my brother about it, and he's not necessarily the kind of person who, would dwell on the details much. So that's why I thought that I'd put together all of the details here, so at least I can voice them out. And in case there's somebody who's going to have a bone marrow biopsy done tomorrow, day after tomorrow, or something like that, this is basically what I went through. Now, like I said before, I didn't want to read up on the procedure. I didn't necessarily want to know much about the procedure before I went in, because I had this thing in my mind of what a bone marrow biopsy would be, and I knew that it either was going to be a heck of a lot worse than what I was anticipating, or better than what I was anticipating. And there's you have to go through it. It is what it is. You can't mess about. So I said, why even bother? Just go into it. Now, the one recommendation that I do have is, before you go into getting a procedure like this, speak to your doctor and see if you can get some sedation done beforehand. I was on the bed lying down with my back facing doctor when I said, hey, by the way, I've read that some people choose to get sedation before they do this procedure. And then he told me that, that's something that we'd have to set up a couple of days in advance so that it would be ready right before the procedure. And, he's right. You can't tell them 2 minutes before they're going to cut into you that, oh, I want some sedation before we do this. So keep that in mind. Speak to your doctor, consider sedation before you go in, because I think that would make the process a little bit easier. Now, having said that, physically, it wasn't the hardest thing ever, but psychologically, it really, really, really messed me up. So that's that. That's, that part of it is there. I basically had my appointment at 9:45 in the morning. Oh, but before we get into that, before we get into the biopsy, there is another thing I want to bring up, and that is my kids. So yesterday I was sitting around in the morning before we sent them to school, and then my older son, who's 10 years old right now, was really down about the fact that they were planning to go on a trip to see his grandparents before or during the spring break. And then when we got my diagnosis, my wife decided not to go, and they decided to stay with me. So he was really bummed out about that. And in general, he was just like, being a bit grumpy. And I said, hey, listen, let me tell you the reason why you guys didn't go. And I told him that I've been feeling sick, and it's not the kind of thing that, goes away after a couple of days. He's like, yeah, but I was sick last week, and I'm better. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. You were sick last week, you get better. I'm sick right now, I'm going to get better, but it's not going to last a couple of days. This is going to last for quite a while. So we're going to have to do this over months and months. And he's like, okay, fine. If that's the case, then, I understand why we didn't go. So that was me dealing with that. And then about an hour later, I headed down towards the hospital to get the bone marrow biopsy. So I wanted to let you know that's how I started the process of telling my 10-year-old about my cancer. I haven't told my 6-year-old yet because I don't know how I'm gonna breach the topic with him. I'm waiting to get some kind of counseling before doing that. But I think the 10-year-old's old enough to know, to at least understand and recognize that something is going on, and then we deal with the details a little bit later. But at least I'm laying the groundworks right now for them to know that I'm going to be going through a period of time where there's going to be treatment and things like that. So 9:45 was my appointment to get my biopsy done, my bone marrow biopsy done. I get into the hospital, walk up to the laboratory section. They tell me that I need to get a bunch of blood work done before the biopsy, which is fine. I sit down, I get, I give some blood, and then I'm told that there will be another technician who's going to be present during the biopsy. And the first lady that I spoke to wouldn't give me any information about what the bone marrow biopsy was going to be like. Oh, she said, somebody's going to come in a couple of minutes and then, take you to the room and they're going to explain the entire procedure to you. Red flag number one. If they're not willing to tell you what the procedure is, it's not going to be fun. So I waited around. The other technician came. The room wasn't available yet. So I said, okay, walk me through what's going to happen in the room. I wasn't nervous, but I was quite anxious at that point. So he brought down his voice a couple of things, and he's like, I don't necessarily want to say it out here. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. You don't want to freak out everybody else who's sitting in the room. He's like, yeah, but basically, you're gonna go inside, lie down, and they're gonna freeze the area and then take a sample. And I'm like, great, okay. So I figured that part out, but I want to know a little bit more details. So he's like, okay, fine, we'll let you know all of the details when we're inside. So we went inside, got a gown on, took off my clothes, lied down. The doctor came in. It was actually performed by a pathologist, not the technicians. And they marked the location that they were going to go in first. And this was just in my hip. I believe that it's the hip bone that they went into. So not load bearing, which is important, because I don't think I would have been able to walk afterwards if it was in the thigh or something. And then that's the location that they generally choose, unless there's some reason why they shouldn't. Right side, and mark the location with a pen, clean the area off. Started with a series of local anesthetic. I think it was like 3 or 4 different levels. So I didn't get any topical, which is fine. I don't have a problem with needles, so I didn't need topical. But then I got one dose, which was right under the skin, and then within a couple of minutes, they went a little bit lower, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. And, we sat around for literally like 2 or 3 minutes while they were waiting for the freezing to kick in. And then they started. They started with what I believe, they didn't tell me, but what I believe was a 14 gauge needle. Or maybe they started out with a 16 gauge needle first. Although now thinking about it, he requested a green one, but that was afterwards. Let me tell you how it started. So they started with, I believe, a 16 gauge needle first. And the procedure was exactly what I expected it to be. The only thing that I felt was a lot of pressure being applied to me from behind, as if somebody had their hand on my hip and was just applying pressure. But I know what they were doing. They were turning a tiny little screw to basically drill into my bone. So that was you know what's going on. I'm looking straight ahead. I'm holding on to the bed rail. There isn't pain, but knowing what's going on is just, it was incredible. And you hear the tick, 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 the grinding almost of the implement against the bone. So that took a couple of seconds. At one point, he tells me that he's pulling the needle out. I couldn't feel anything that wasn't on the bone. I couldn't feel it. On the bone, I had a feeling of pressure. I knew that something was going on, but I didn't feel pain per se. So he says I'm pulling the needle out. He requests the green needle, and I did a little bit of research later, and I realized that the green needle is a 14 gauge needle. So that's approximately 1.5 millimeters. That's a significant size of needle. And, started again. Apparently what happened is that the first needle bent while he was trying to get in. And yeah, that was interesting. He later on told me that it was a good thing it just bent and not snapped, because if it had snapped, we'd have to go and rush into surgery to get it out. But so the needle bent, swapped out needles, tried again, tick, 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 tick. And then he broke through. And then when he broke through, what it felt like was if you open up a can of Coke that's been shaken for quite a while. So when you do that, not only do you have the sound of the release, the gas and the liquid being released, you also feel a little bit of a compression in the can as you're holding it, right? And that's exactly how I felt. I felt the sound of the release. I heard the sound of the release. I felt the pressure of the release. And then all down the right side of my body, I could literally feel stuff oozing out of my of the hole in my back, basically. It was a very, very strange sensation that I did not enjoy at all. Not painful, but it did feel scary. I let out a little cry and then I apologized for it later. But that was an interesting sensation. After that was done, after he took that sample, they basically pulled the liquid from there and they put it up onto a bunch of slides. I think there was about, if I'm not wrong, about 20 to 24 slides that they took samples of. So they had 24 different samples, a lot of liquid. And then after that, he wanted to take a core sample as well. So we started out with another needle. And that was it looked like a 14 gauge, if not a 12 gauge. I actually think it might have been a 12 gauge because I saw the core sample that came out of it. And there was about that much of core sample. And it was easily just under 2 millimeters. So I'm assuming that it was a 12 gauge needle. And pretty much after that, they just closed it up. No stitches required. I was bleeding for quite a while though. They had a lot of pressure. They put a lot of pressure on the wound. They had me lie down on my back with a towel right under me where the wound was, so that it would increase the pressure on the wound. So I did that for about 15 minutes. After that, they put a dressing on it. They slapped the dressing on me and they said, all right, you're good to go. And I could walk. I didn't have any trouble walking and didn't have too much pain as well. And that was basically the entire procedure. Again, psychologically, it was a lot more difficult than it was physically. The pain afterwards was relatively mild. I had a little bit of discomfort, mainly more than pain. But I do feel that there is, some type of, if you sit down really hard and then you bruise your hip bone, it feels like the bone is bruised. I kind of have that feeling right now. So as I'm standing up or sitting down, moving around, or as I'm sitting here right now, I do have a little bit of a throbbing in my hip, which I know is the fact that there's a whole chunk of bone and bone marrow missing. So again, psychologically, it's a lot worse than it is physically. But yeah, that was that experience. Not one that I'm looking forward to repeating. However, I know that I'm going to have to do it a couple more times at least. But what I will do differently next time is that I will request sedation before the procedure. I think that'll put me at ease a little bit, just so it's not, it doesn't bother me as much as they're going through it. Again, pain level, if I had to rate the pain level, there wasn't much pain. I don't think there was much pain. It was discomfort more than anything else. There was a little bit of pain when they were actually drawing the sample out, but not something that I wouldn't be able to stand. Not something that would make me black out. So yeah, that's it. Just wanted to share that and let you know what I went through or what the procedure entailed. And catch you next time.